Hello everyone, this is Liam here. This is going to be a bit of a different video for my YouTube channel from what I normally do. I was recently invited by Nintendo UK to go check out the Nintendo Switch 2, so I've played more or less all of the major titles that they have demos for so far, and I have a lot of thoughts to share about what I played. I'm going to go pretty in depth here, a lot of nerdy small details and little things that I noticed that I wrote down at the time. So you may learn a thing or two, you may find this boring as hell, who knows, stay tuned and find out. But I'm a huge fan of Metroid, so I'm going to talk a lot about Metroid Prime 4, which I did play. I will say there was a lot out of what I played that I loved. Some of it I didn't. Some of it I went away with mixed impressions, with concerns. And I'm going to be completely brutally honest with you here. This is not a fluff piece or anything like that. I'm going to be honest with you here based upon my experiences. Keep in mind, these aren't the final games, obviously. These are demos. But yes, with that caveat aside, I'm going to go through my impressions, talk about what I saw, and along the way, I'm also going to answer some of your questions because people have sent in their questions to me for me to address on Blue Sky and on Patreon, so I'm going to get into those. And I just want to briefly touch upon the hardware itself to start off with. So before I get to the games, let me talk about the hardware itself and what I thought about it as someone who had some reservations going in, especially to do with the screen. So with regards to the Switch 2 hardware itself, it felt sturdier than the Switch 1 did, or the OLED. At one point, I ended up holding the system by just one Joy-Con because I was trying to take a photo of my other hand and the person I was with was busy playing Mario Kart, so I couldn't get her to do it. And when I did this, I didn't feel any give or wiggle in the system. You know, the magnetic Joy-Con felt like it was fixed in place very firmly. The launch system, the launch Switch, had a very big issue with that back in the day. You know, they would become loose, and maybe that is still a thing that can happen. But the Switch OLED, I remember, went some way to fixing that. And from what I could tell, these demo Switch 2s at least, which, you know, are pretty much going to be the final system, the final hardware, they felt like they had fixed it completely. It just feels like one continuous piece of technology, you know, just one device, all interconnected. And in fact, I went most of the day before it even occurred to me, oh wait, this is not this is not attached to the system. I can remove the Joy-Con, so I should try snapping it off. You know, it just genuinely didn't occur to me to do that for a while. So that's a pretty good indication of how much more solid this feels than the Switch 1 did. So that's good. The system feels much bigger than the previous Switches, and, you know, even the Switch OLED, which I play on at home, when I got home after the trip, I picked mine up and I felt, oh, wow, this looks kind of small now. And that just shows you within several hours, I got used to having that bigger screen right away, and I much preferred it. And, you know, I think having a bigger screen makes sense. Adults want a bigger screen. There's not many people taking the Switch outside like they did with the DS. You know, these systems, they mostly stay at home. These are premium systems that stay at home. They're not really portable anymore, you know, so why not? Having that extra real estate makes handheld mode play feel more viable for a lot more games that are busier, like strategy games, or have smaller text, stuff like Fire Emblem, I remember, doesn't have very customizable text sizes. But back to the system itself, there's a satisfying heft to it. It was difficult to gauge how heavy it was exactly, since all of the devices were tethered to the kiosks by two wires, a charging cable and like an additional wire that was securing it in place. But it felt like it was slightly heavier than the Switch OLED, as you would expect. This is a bigger machine. It's more powerful. It's, you know, the innards are more packed. But it is just as slim as the other Switches, which they made a point of in the Direct, I remember. But the screen is something that I was very interested in, and I have to say the screen is very nice. It is LCD, and that was a point of contention. You know, this is something that I was concerned about because I like an OLED screen. I love the OLED Vita. I love the Switch OLED. But on the whole, I will say, comparing the two, it's probably better overall, the Switch 2 screen. Now, it doesn't have the deep blacks of the Switch OLED, of course. That's the only trade-off, I felt like. But it is in 1080p. Most of the games seem to run at 1080p on it. It is very vibrant and colorful because it has HDR now. The colors really pop. Hades 2 looked brilliant on it. And I think the black lines in that look good, right? They look good on the OLED. They look good here too. So my concerns were pretty much put to rest by seeing it and playing it in person. This is not the case where it is a step backwards to the Switch 1. You know, you compare the Switch 1 screen to the Switch OLED, it's night and day. Well, it's not, you know, a step backwards to Switch 1. They are both LCDs, but this is a much higher quality one. It's brighter as well. It's brighter than the OLED. We were playing it in a very well-lit environment, and there were no issues with it with regards to glare or anything like that. No issues seeing the games clearly. So if you thought, yeah, this was going to be going back to Switch 1 from the OLED, if you're like me, you like the Switch OLED, rest assured that it's not. To me, I thought it looked great. So that concern was set aside for me. The whole system is bigger, of course, and that means the Joy-Con are bigger. And in my opinion, they're much more comfortable. The sticks are bigger and more comfortable. Same goes for the buttons, which still have the same clicky buttons that you had on the Switch 1. And I guess, on the topic of this, I did get a question on Blue Sky from someone called Ven Jacobs, who said this: "My biggest hardware concern is the size of the buttons that deactivate the magnets keeping the new Joy-Cons attached to the main unit. If you got to mess with it in handheld mode, how did it feel? And could you see people accidentally pressing it and causing problems?" So I played it in handheld mode a bunch, and I can honestly say that this doesn't seem to be a problem at all. It took me a while, as I said, to even remember that they were there, so I never once accidentally knocked them. My hands just didn't seem to make contact with them or bother with them. For whatever reason, I was holding it a bunch, and it seemed very secured in there. So for me, I have no worries about that at all after trying it, to be honest. So that's good, and hopefully that answers your question. Another question I got was from Girthquake, who asked this: did you get to use the new Pro controller? How did it feel, especially the D-pad? Feel better than the one for the Switch 1? So I did get to try the new Pro controller, and it did feel really nice. It felt a little bit bigger than the original one. It felt a little bit more deluxe, a bit more premium. It has a nice finish on it. The sticks and the buttons are a bit bigger, noticeably so actually, and it has two rear buttons on the back of it. Now, those didn't have any functionality in the demos I tried, but I played with them a bunch when we were waiting for the games to start, and those felt great to me. The click felt very good. The buttons feel really a little smooth and glossy to the touch, but very comfortable to use. And yeah, overall, it's very comfortable, a very comfortable controller, and I think I'll end up getting one of them. But on the subject of controllers, I did get to try the new mouse controls in a few different games, and I'm going to start by talking about the game that I felt used them best, which was Metroid Prime 4. Before I dive into the nitty-gritty of the Metroid stuff, let me talk about the technical side of things with the Metroid Prime 4 Beyond demo. It was running at 120 frames per second on what looked like an LED TV. It was 120 frames per second only. I did ask out of curiosity if I could see the 4K 60 mode, but it was not available in this demo. It was not available to play in handheld mode either, so no point asking about that if anyone's curious. The final game will apparently have a 4K 60 mode in TV mode, and it will be able to do 120 frames per second in handheld mode, and that will be in, I think, 720p is what they've said. Based upon what I've played, if you've played Metroid Prime Remastered on the Switch, that's about what you can expect in terms of visual fidelity in the 120 frames per second mode, with some slight improvements, and it is in a slightly higher resolution than that game as well. Prime Remastered ran at 900p in TV mode, and in 120 frames per second, Prime 4 runs at 1080p in TV mode. Nintendo was demoing Prime 4, pushing the mouse controls as a big focus. I sat down in front of a screen at a desk and I played them on this very large fabric mouse mat they had laid out. I had some concerns about how the mouse controls on Switch 2 would work, and here's what I'll say about them now that I've used them. That demo did sell me on them being fun to use, and possibly even being the optimal way to play Prime 4. Initially, when I started playing, I found the controls a little bit too sensitive, so I tweaked them, which you could do. There were some limited options for tweaking the controls in the pause menu, so I opened those, I turned the sensitivity down, and then I found, oh, it's not kind of sensitive enough for me now, so I just set them back to the default. Now, I think there's a happy medium in there for me, but I just decided that I would try to get used to it, and for the most part, I got used to it quite quickly. At an event like that, you don't really have time to mess around with settings like that too much, so I didn't want to waste their time, and I just got on with it. And I will say this, the aiming feels extremely quick and smooth to control. Any moment that required me to aim freely, such as when I had to shoot 4 lights on a door to open it, I went through that in like a second. It felt very intuitive. If I wanted to switch from mouse controls to gyro aiming, which it does support, all I needed to do was lift my right Joy-Con up off the mat, and immediately it switched to it. It was seamless, on the fly, and it felt surprisingly good. It didn't require me to jump into the options for that, it just worked seamlessly. And the pointer controls, for anyone curious, it felt good to me. It felt similar to the option for that in Prime Remastered, but it was just absolutely eclipsed by the quickness and the precision of the mouse controls, in my opinion. Using the Joy-Con like a mouse, it didn't feel too small or finicky, as some have been concerned about. The Joy-Con on the Switch 2 are larger, the ergonomics are much better, the buttons are larger, and that includes the shoulder buttons, so the feel of the shoulder buttons, they feel good, the buttons feel nice as you click them in, and it's just very comfortable, yeah. I don't think that this is a situation where I could see my hand cramping up after long play sessions. The ergonomics felt good to me, and I was surprised by how comfortable it was using this control scheme. The combination of the snappy mouse controls and 120 frames per second, it feels amazing to play. It's super tight and very responsive. Personally, I would like to try the 4K 60 mode. 120 frames per second, don't get me wrong, it's great. It's a real technical feat seeing it run like that, looking as good as it does. But I want to play a new Metroid Prime in 4K. I want to see how good it can look. I want to see what retro can get out of the Switch 2, because they did such a good job with the Switch 1 in Prime Remastered. So I feel like 4K 60 will give me a really sharp, finely detailed game while still having some of that smoothness. Another concern of mine that I had going in was how much physical space would I actually need when I'm aiming with the mouse controls? How practical are they for your average person with the average setup to use? And in the case of Prime 4, it felt like the answer was really not a lot. I didn't have to move my hand around a lot. At the same time, I'm skeptical of Nintendo's claim that you can play this by resting your hand on your pants. Maybe that's fine for some games. I think unless your thighs are reasonably big, you would be better off having some kind of tray or maybe a big book on your lap and doing it on there. And that's the impression I got anyway. I think the Joy-Con mouse controls are more versatile with the surfaces you can use compared to your average mouse, but a flat, consistent surface is always going to be better, and that's what I would personally recommend. There was another game I played that used the mouse controls, and its use of it was much more concerning to me and felt like it was impractical, which I'll come to, but for now, back to Prime 4. The demo contained what I assume is the opening of the game. Samus lands on a planet where a Galactic Federation research facility is under siege, which we first saw in the trailer they showed back in 2024. It begins with this spectacular opening cinematic. It looks like something out of Halo 3. Samus is in her ship, she's taking down space pirate battleships. It looks amazing. In person, I was having a hard time detecting whether or not that was pre-rendered, any of it. Instinctively, I initially suspected that might be the case, but the way it seamlessly transitioned into gameplay made me think otherwise. I guess the fact that I couldn't tell in the moment means that it basically doesn't matter, but I will give Retro the benefit of the doubt on that one. Something I will point out about that cutscene that people watching it at home will not pick up on is there is rumble throughout the cutscenes, and this was my introduction to the rumble in the Switch Joy-Con, which was quite intense. It is noticeably stronger and more impressive than the HD rumble on Switch 1. I was surprised by that because this isn't really something Nintendo seems to be highlighting. Obviously, the rumble was used during gameplay as well, and it felt really good. For instance, you feel it when you use the charge beam. You can feel it building up in intensity until you release it. That felt really cool. In terms of the shooting mechanics, which some people have asked me about, it felt closer to Prime 3 than 1 and 2, at least in the mode I played, because you do need to aim between the lock-ons at specific targets, like you do, I think, in Prime 3, where you use the Wii pointer. You can lock onto an enemy like in that game and then aim at their weak points within the lock-on. So for instance, the demo ended with this big boss fight against this space pirate called Abarax that had become fused with a Metroid. And interestingly, I scanned the boss and it literally did say Metroid fusion has resulted in a loss of free will and the formation of beam projection lenses on its chest, which I thought was interesting. Another interesting thing that I scanned during the demo was this large Galactic Federation mech. If anyone is interested, this is what the scan said for that. It was called a Galactic Federation Heavyweight Class Golem. Quote, MK-99 Bipedal Manned War Mech. Right arm loadout includes a charged particle cannon with a max output equal to a frigate's main battery. These look like a larger evolution of the mechs from Federation Force. Operation Golem was the name of the Galactic Federation project that produced the mechs seen throughout that game. You could scan a bunch of interesting things like a Galactic Federation troop transportation vehicle, which was called a DRT tactical truck. I also scanned a space pirate dropship, which is called a dive spike, and the entry for that reads, the cone-shaped chassis and thrusters enable direct insertion into fortified positions, while landing impacts are mitigated via energy conversions upon opening. Lastly, I scanned a space pirate because why not? And this is the entry for that, quote, alien morphology space pirate, ruthless, brutal, and bellicose intergalactic marauder. This is one example of the diverse alien life forms that make up the space pirates, end quote. I just thought that was interesting that they highlighted that the space pirates, it's not simply a race of aliens, it is a coalition of different kinds of aliens that have united to be very mean. Anyway, in terms of Samus's moveset in the opening, from memory, she has the power beam, obviously, the charge beam, the missile launcher, morph ball bomb, and the morph ball boost. I hadn't seen anyone using the morph ball boost, but it was in there, and I used it to get through the morph ball sections pretty quickly because of it. Something that wasn't highlighted in the demo, but I did notice was there, is that the strafing has been updated in this game. When you're locked onto an enemy, you can now strafe forward and backwards, as well as side to side, and it's going to take me a while to rewire my brain around that, after having played the previous game so much, but that is a welcome addition. The boss in the demo had an attack where it can grab you, so strafing backwards is how I imagine you're supposed to avoid that. When you get grabbed, it's pretty easy to escape. You just have to mash the A button. Just a very easy, simple little QTE, so don't worry about that. A lot of people have asked me, was it more like Prime 1 or 2 or 3? The section that they were demoing was a lot like something out of Metroid Prime 3 more than Prime 1 or 2. But I think that is just the case that this is the opening of the game. I think beyond that, it is back to more classic Prime as we've seen in the directs. Let me tell you what I expect from the full game. The demo ended with the device being knocked over during a firefight between Samus and Psylocke, and it sends out this enormous white shockwave that envelops the planet. I'm thinking that the device sends Samus to the past, so the green planet we saw her exploring in the other trailer is basically the same planet from the past. That's my theory. Perhaps it has some significance to Psylocke as well. That would make sense if we were to see his backstory through this lens as well. That was a distinct possibility, I feel like, given that this game is going to explore him in more detail. Anyway, I think beyond the opening, you'll be exploring that environment, which will be more like classic Metroid Prime. One big planet with different biomes where you're mostly on your own, solving puzzles, exploring, all that stuff. The big bombastic opening reminds me a lot of Metroid Prime 3 Corruption, but I think it is just to get you to grips with the mechanics, setting the stage for the story and Psylocke and all that, and after that, yeah, it's back to being more like the original Prime. To conclude my impressions though, the shooting felt genuinely like the best it's ever felt in any Metroid Prime game to me, and I think that's down to how comfortable the mouse controls and the new Joy-Con are. It's very precise and fluid. The rumble feedback also feels really good, and I think that brings a nice tactile feel to the shooting as well. The cinematics in this game look unbelievably good. The animations, seemingly they're using some kind of motion capture tech there. It looks excellent. The visual presentation of it overall is just looking very promising. And I'll close out this section by answering this question from Splash on Blue Sky, who said, "How's the map in Prime 4's compared to previous Metroid Prime games? I loved Prime Remastered, first Prime game I played, but the map in the game was a bit frustrating to read and understand." Well, honestly, it looked very readable to me. It was pretty simple in terms of structure, the map, the way it was laid out, because it was just the opening section of the game. But it seemed to me, at a glance, like it was easier to read than the map from Prime 1. I love that game, but I know what you mean. The map in the older games can get a little hard to read sometimes. There are a lot of lines on those 3D maps, and from what I could see, from what I can remember, it was not as bad as that in the Prime 4 demo. Now, the full game might be different, but in the demo, from what I played, again, this is not the final game, I could tell that the map was a bit more readable, in my opinion. The next game I want to talk about is Mario Kart World. This is their big launch title. This was the first game I played on Switch 2. It seems like they were really pushing it, as you would expect. I know expectations are high for it, so I'm going to be as honest as I can here in, doling out my impressions. My first response was, wow, this game looks so colorful and crisp. It's running in what appeared to be an upscaled 4K at 60 frames per second. The frame rate appeared to be rock solid. There was absolute chaos going on during some of the races, and it seemed to hold up perfectly. In this game, as you're probably aware by now, all of the Mario Kart tracks are woven together in a big open world a la Forza Horizon, and seeing it in person, I found it quite technically impressive how well rendered that all was. I did a number of 24-person races going across this world. There was a lot happening, but the performance was steady. The draw distance, no issues there. The image quality looked great. All of it looked sharp. 4K and HDR do this game a lot of favors. They really make those colors pop. That is going to be a gift for Nintendo's first-party output, which, are often very colorful games. It's great how it's looking much more expressive and detailed than previous Mario Kart games, but I really appreciated how vivid those colors were on the TV and in handheld mode. I did get to try both. Both look great. It looks excellent running in handheld mode on that screen, and it loads pretty quickly. From choosing a character to loading in the world in handheld mode, it loaded in about 6 or 7 seconds, and given the visual fidelity of it and how many races there are at the same time, I'd say that's pretty good. On the topic of Mario Kart World, here's a question I got on Blue Sky from Jack's Pool, who asked this. In Mario Kart World, is there a way to start a race in a costume, or do you have to start in their default appearance? Yes, you can. In the demo, there were obviously the characters in their regular costumes, as you would expect, and then you can scroll along, you can use the shoulder buttons to scroll along and see more characters and see them in their alternate costumes. And these costumes occupy separate character spots, and I assume you unlock more of them by collecting them during races and by exploring the world. I love the new costumes that they have in this game. Some of them are very fun and cute and have a lot of personality, and I really like that they've taken away that from Mario Kart Tour. That was the best part of it, was the variety of the different costumes they had in that, but now they have it in a game that I actually want to play, so that's good. Some people have asked about this, the free roam mode. The individual free roam mode was not available during the demo I played. However, prior to doing a knockout mode race with about 20 other people, the game allowed us to freely drive around the map while we waited, kind of like a lobby. I'm not sure if this is exactly the same as the free roam mode that will be in the final game, but exploring the world in this demo felt very barren. There wasn't very much to see or do. I drove around a couple of different environments. I drove through some water. I drove out to the desert and through some sand. And the terrain you're on does affect your speed like it did in the old games, by the way. But when you're out in the desert, every so often power-ups like a Starman would spawn, and I could grab that to go faster through the sand, which was quite fun. I'm hoping the final game's free roam mode is more elaborate and there's more to do, which I have to assume there must be. This might just be a more basic version of it that serves as a lobby, so I'm not too concerned yet. The setup of it does remind me a lot of Forza Horizon, and it made me wish there was some kind of skill trick combo system like in the Forza Horizon games, something to make doing more skillful driving and tricks more worthwhile aside from just going faster or during the races. It felt like there wasn't really much incentive to try that, but maybe I was missing something. Maybe I'm guessing there are special collectibles that you have to reach by skillfully driving and using the wall hopping and grinding and all that. But at least in this lobby version of the free roam, there wasn't a lot to do. I was just kind of driving through empty environments, and there were a couple of interesting little Easter eggs and characters popping up that I noticed, which were quite cool. But other than that, there wasn't really much to do. I get the impression that the open world is hiding a bunch of secrets, however, because I think I might have spotted a cameo from a Zelda creature in it. Now, I'm not entirely sure about this, but when I was driving through the desert, a group of armadillo-like creatures emerged from the sand and started rolling towards me to hit me, and they looked almost exactly like the Caromadillo enemies from Zelda. Now, these were in Echoes of Wisdom. There's a possibility that these are just very similar cartoon armadillo creatures from the Mario universe, but these things look to me a lot like the Caromadillos from Echoes of Wisdom, just updated in the Mario Kart World style. I could be wrong about that, but that's what they look like to me. Anyway, I did a few different races in Mario Kart World. The first was a regular Grand Prix mode, and then we played Knockout mode, which I enjoyed immensely. This is basically Battle Royale Mario Kart, a bit like F-Zero 99. And this was the standout part of the game for me personally. You drive across the world together in one continuous, seamless race, touring through 4 different tracks along the way. You begin with 24 players in the race, and at a time, 8 are knocked out after each leg of the race, each location you drive through. It was very tense. It was very exciting. I ended up coming 3rd out of 24 on my first go, so I was pretty happy with that. But the knockout mode goes on for quite a while if you survive until the end, like maybe half an hour, 40 minutes, something like that, maybe half an hour, I think. And as it went on, I felt like it became progressively more and more high pressure in a good way. I could feel my heart beating by the end of it when we finished, honestly. It was so exciting. The knockout mode left a really good impression on me. I enjoyed it a lot, and I would recommend everyone check that out when the game comes out. Here's a question from Bob, who asked this. How is Mario Kart with 24 races on the course? Does it ever get too overwhelming? Well, it is bedlam, to be honest. You have 24 players regularly getting one or often two items at about the same time, so there are items flying everywhere. There's a lot of push and pull. The rubber banding felt quite prominent. Sometimes I would get out heading first, and then I'd take a hit or two, and then quickly I'm back in 11th or 12th as everyone caught up to me quite quickly. And it was chaotic, but just about manageable, in my opinion. Something that mitigated some of the frustration, which the Nintendo rep beside me kept reminding me of, was the tracks are long. If you get hit and lose your position in the race or make a mistake, you have a bit of time to recover in the race, and you'll probably get a good item that will help you do that because it's Mario Kart. In terms of the balancing, it reminded me more of Mario Kart Wii, to be honest, than 8. There is definitely some luck involved as usual. Some people will not like that, will not like hearing all this, but the impression I get is that the grinding and the wall hopping mechanics they've introduced in this game might make it so that more skilled players can still claim the upper hand and overcome the luck-based elements, the rubber banding, to succeed. That's my hope anyway. I did find the grinding and the side jumping quite tricky to pull off during races, so I didn't rely on it because I think that will take some practice for me to get the hang of. But the grinding does feel super fun in my opinion. Jumping on and off the rails was a lot of fun. But if you're not down with a more chaotic Mario Kart, I'll be honest, you might not like this. You have to embrace the chaos to enjoy it, in my opinion. But yeah, that's what I think about that. Something new in this game is that when your car makes contact with bodies of water, you no longer go underwater and drive along the bottom of the water like you did in Mario Kart 8. Now you drive over the water. So your car transforms into a jet ski type vehicle. Reminds me a little bit of Wave Race, I suppose, but doesn't have as much maneuverability as that game, but it felt good. You can still, do the power sliding on it. The waves and the ripples in the water cause you to bounce and get some air, at which point you can pull off tricks to boost yourself. And a pretty key addition in this game is that you can perform an unlimited amount of tricks in midair. It just depends on how much air you've got. And I love that. You pair that with the grinding and the wall running, and it feels like there is a higher skill ceiling now more than ever. And also you have items like the feather returning, so there's a lot of air in this game. There's a lot you can do to propel yourself upwards, and I like that. I feel like that is going to result in some interesting shortcuts and some very tricky play from more skilled players. Something else that I noticed that I thought was cool is that when I didn't have an item equipped and I held the left trigger down, my character could perform a taunt or dance animation. And I was playing as, what else? The Moo Moo Meadows cow that everyone's talking about. And that caused my cow to raise its front hooves in the air and perform a little wave, a little dance side to side. So I thought that was a fun little new feature. As you might expect, many people picked the cow. The Nintendo staffer I was talking to told me that that was a staff favorite. And I can see why. Out of the 20 or so people who I was playing with, I think over half of them were playing as the cow. So that was pretty funny on the start line, seeing like 10 cows back to back. So that was cool. I did notice that you can no longer customize individual parts on your carts like you could in Mario Kart 8. It's back to just picking carts and vehicles whole. And I'm not sure how I feel about that. I don't know if it's going to be a big deal. I like that feature in Mario Kart 8, and it does feel like a little bit of a regression to me, but it's different, and I'm going to give them the benefit of the doubt. Maybe it's just a way to get people into the races quicker, and I guess it doesn't really matter at the end of the day. I like that feature, though, and I might miss it, but I'll give them the benefit of the doubt. It wasn't really much of a big deal, to be honest with you. Overall, I really like all of the new additions. All the new playable characters are quite wacky and inspired. I love the new costumes. Visually fantastic. It runs very smoothly, controls very tightly. It is chaotic though. The rubber banding is real. But the tracks being as long as they were, it gave me a lot of room to catch up, so I didn't really mind that much. But if you're concerned about that, it might be an issue for you. I'll end this section by answering a couple of questions. Here's one from Chocolate Junior 9 who said this. I can't really think of much, so most wanted for Mario Kart World. Well, they're definitely going more out of the box in this game with the character selection. So I would like to see Flood from Mario Sunshine, because why not? You know, you've got all kinds of weird things in this. You've got the cow from Moo Moo Meadows. You've got dolphins and penguins. So why not? I also think Professor Egad would be great. You know, from Luigi's Mansion. I'd always love to see more of the Kong family as well. Dixie Kong, Cranky Kong, you know, they've never been playable, I think, in Mario Kart. Maybe they are in Tour, actually. Maybe Dixie's in Tour, I don't remember. But Professor Egad would be great, or Cranky. Those would probably be my two most wanted. But Flood would be more funny. That would be the more funny choice. So go with that, Nintendo. Give me Flood. That would be fun. Lastly, Lucas asked this. Did Mario Kart feel a little boring with a lot of just straight sections? It really didn't. The layouts of the courses didn't seem repetitive at all, and it didn't strike me at all that there were a lot of straight sections, if there are. There was still plenty of variety in the way the courses were laid out, a lot of different geometry, a lot of very different looking environments, and I really enjoyed all of the new tracks that I played, to be honest. The next game that I played was Drag and Drive, which is a new IP from Nintendo. It's basically wheelchair basketball, although that's apparently not what Nintendo themselves are calling it. They're not calling them wheelchairs, but that's more or less what they are. I'm going to call them wheelchairs, so deal with it. I was not overly impressed by this when I saw the announcement trailer, but I wanted to give it a fair shot. I like when Nintendo tries new things, and I'm not one of those people who is totally opposed to motion controls. I don't mind the Wii and all that, you know, so I wanted to give it a fair shake, and I feel like I have done that now. So here are some of my honest thoughts on how this played and what I thought of it. To play Drag and Drive, you're supposed to hold the two Joy-Con down on a surface in the mouse controller configuration and drag them over the surface forward and backwards to maneuver your wheelchair. To shoot the ball, you raise your hand upwards and swish your wrist down like you're throwing a basketball. To gain possession of the basketball, you can knock the basketball out of the hands of other players by ramming into them. And when you're going at top speed, a light will appear behind your vehicle or wheelchair. So there's a little bit to it. It's not overly complex. You can also slam dunk the ball by riding the vehicles or the wheelchairs up ramps and then supposedly flicking down the remotes, but I could never get it to work. The demo started with this long tutorial trying to familiarize you with the controls. We did a little obstacle course type thing and then practiced shooting the ball before we went into a versus match type thing in 2 teams of 3. I think everyone there found the controls confusing, at least initially. For me, for my part, I felt like I was just finally starting to get used to them by the time the demo ended, which lasted about 20 minutes overall. Other people seemed to be struggling more. I think only about half of the people playing managed to get any real possession of the ball, and only 2 of us scored. I scored twice, another dude scored twice, I think, and I was slowly getting the hang of it, but I could not figure out how to slam dunk the ball. I asked the Nintendo reps if they could explain how to do this, because I could get air, you know, I could speed the ball towards their side of the court, go up the ramp, but the Nintendo rep didn't really seem to understand what gesture I needed to do for the slam dunk, and the way they explained it, I could never get it to work, and neither could anyone else there. I was skeptical of this, and it did grow on me a little. I will say this, it has excellent use of the HD Rumble in Switch 2, assuming that's still what they're calling that. I think it has maybe, you know, one of the best examples of it out of everything I tried. Maybe I'm not sure, but What that was is when you are dragging the remote over the surface in the mouse controller modes, you can feel the wheels clicking as they turn in your wheelchair. And the rumble changed based upon the speed at which I was moving the wheels as well. And it felt really satisfying. So overall, I think it's a neat experiment, but you need a lot of surface area to play it. And yeah, I just cannot see many people having the setup to play this properly. I think this is a very niche game that I think maybe if it was free to play or very cheap, it could find an audience, but otherwise, I just can't see it taking off. This is an example of a game using the mouse controls on the Switch 2 where you need a really large surface area to use them. You need to create a whole new setup just to play it in the right conditions, I think. You need a lot of room to move your arms. You need a large surface with preferably a large mouse mat. And outside of an event like this, how many people are going to have that available to them? How many people are going to buy or create a setup just to play this game? This is already a very niche game. And the controller setup, I feel like, is going to just do more to render the audience even smaller. So I think it's asking a lot of the player in terms of their physical setup. And the controls are definitely not flawless. They work well enough, but they're quite confusing. And it is quite easy when you are moving the controllers back and forth to accidentally drag them along the surface of the mouse mats accidentally when you are moving them from one position to the other. You know, let's say you thrust the controllers forward on the surface. Well, now they're in front of you, right? And let's say you need to do that again. So you'll need to lift the controllers up and pull them back into the previous position to push forward again. What if, as you're moving the controllers backwards, you drag them accidentally along the surface, and then you were going to register the opposite movement from what you were intending to do, if that makes any sense. So I feel like there's a lot of potential for you to get confused, and I could see that happening. People accidentally inputting, the wrong inputs, and were having trouble controlling the vehicles or wheelchairs. And so, yeah, it's not at all flawless. I feel like you could get used to it. I feel like there are some people who are going to get really good at this, but it seems like a very niche thing. I'm not sure as a product how well this is going to do, how viable this is going to be as a product, and if it's going to find its audience. I will also say that I don't think the art style is very interesting, very little color or personality to it, and it's just not visually memorable in any way. It's a little generic looking, and I'm hoping that there is ample customization for your players in this, because otherwise it is going to look pretty drab. And to be honest, from the demo playing it, that's what I thought about it. It was visually uninteresting, not very memorable. All it has going for it is the interesting controller setup, the premise of having a wheelchair basketball game. There's not many of those around, so that's novel. I like that it's trying to do something new, and it's potentially interesting on a representation front, but Nintendo doesn't seem that they're pushing that angle, and that's a shame, because I feel like there is an audience there of disabled people who would like that, but they're just not really treating it like a wheelchair basketball game. They're treating it as a game where you play as people in vehicles, from the way it's being described by certain people online. So I have some mixed impressions about this. I'm not at all sold on it. It's not as bad as I thought it was going to be. I had some fun with it, but I don't think it would have a lot of longevity either, unless there's a bunch of different modes in it, or if it's just very cheap. This is a digital-only game, apparently, one of the reps mentioned, and I'd not heard that before, so that's pretty interesting. Hopefully it's really cheap and then it can find an audience, because otherwise I just cannot see this thing taking off. I think it is going to get relegated to a very niche audience given the controls and the setup you need to really take advantage of it. I didn't think it was bad. It's not as bad as I thought it might be. The controls sort of work. It's an interesting experiment and it's a valiant effort from Nintendo to do something new. But otherwise, I wasn't overly impressed by it, and I could tell that the other people playing were having a much harder time getting to grips with the controls than I was. I grew up with the Wii generation a little bit, you know. GameCube and Wii were sort of the consoles that I played the most as a kid. And so I have a lot of history with motion controls, and I can kind of get my head around a lot of things like this. But it was not flawless. It had issues. And I really struggle to imagine a world where this does really well. Next game, Donkey Kong Bananza. This was one of the games I was most looking forward to trying at the event. I was very excited when it was announced, and I'll be honest, I enjoyed it, but I was not entirely sold on it by this demo. I played it for about 35-40 minutes overall, 2 different sections, 2 different environments. One was an underground mine level, and the other was more like a sunny oasis stage. This was the one first-party Nintendo game showed at this event where the frame rate didn't seem rock solid. In the demo, I started as DK deep underground, and I had to punch my way through a bunch of rocks to tunnel through and find collectibles. The area I started in was very dense in terms of what I could destroy, lots of rock and mud that I could smash through, so I just start hammering the punch button right away, and quickly I noticed it was dropping frames in that area. It's a technically impressive game in some ways because it is rendering all of this environmental destruction dynamically. It is remembering everything you destroyed. The demo was targeting 60 frames and it seemed to get there around there most of the time, but it was chugging a bit in that denser rock area towards the start. It was running at a resolution higher than 1080p from what I could see. The cutscenes looked fantastic, but sometimes I did notice some aliasing during the gameplay. Despite that, it's a very vibrant, pretty game. It's hard to get the full effect unless you see it in person, but there is some beautiful cartoony shading on the characters that looks excellent in my opinion. I love how expressive Donkey Kong is in this. I'm a fan of the new design personally. I like the old one, but I think this is a very new take on the IP, and so it makes sense to do something different that communicates that visually. In terms of the gameplay, I had some mixed impressions. Aspects of it I did enjoy, but I was not completely sold on the environmental destruction, which is such a huge part of the game. I'll come back to that in a moment, actually. Something I did find interesting is how elaborate Donkey Kong's repertoire appears to be in this game. The controls in Donkey Kong platformers are usually very straightforward, and I did not find that to be the case here at all. If you're hoping for a game where there are a lot of different moves, a lot of different movement options for Donkey Kong, you're in luck because it does have those. If I'm not mistaken, there were 3 different buttons just for punching. You could punch what was directly in front of you with the Y button. You could punch below you, i.e. into the ground, with the B button. And you could punch above you using the X button. And on top of that, Donkey Kong can go into a roll like he can in the country games to attack enemies or smash things in front of him. And if you jump and press B, he will do a ground pound type move where he smashes into the ground. If you press the right trigger, he will uproot a piece of the ground and hold it above his head, at which point he can hit enemies with it or throw it in front of him to hit enemies or smash bits of the level. If you hold the right trigger down, you can aim where you're going to throw it, and you can either aim using the right stick or you can do gyro aiming like you do in Splatoon, which felt really good. When you're holding a piece of the terrain, you can go into what is called a turf surf by pressing ZL. Donkey Kong will then surf on the terrain he's lifted up, allowing him to slide down hills and knock over enemies, which was cool. My favorite mechanic, my favorite thing that I tried in the demo was doing this surf turf and then immediately throwing the rock from under me at an enemy. So you can combo the two together and it feels great. The surfing feels a lot like the shield surfing from Zelda. It is almost certainly inspired by it. It appears to be momentum based, feels really good, and then just smashing the terrain chunk into an enemy coming out of it is super satisfying. So I really like that. Another mechanic I enjoyed was picking up bomb rocks, which were basically these explosive chunks of rock that you can rip up and you can throw them at parts of the level. So they explode and wipe out basically anything they touch, and they leave behind a big crater, which I found that quite satisfying, leaving these big craters in the environment, taking out big chunks of the level or blowing up enemies with that. That was fun. Donkey Kong can also perform a hand slap. He basically claps his hands together, creating a shockwave that momentarily allows you to see what is behind the walls nearby. So if there's a collectible behind a layer of rock and you do the hand slap, you can briefly see its outline. So it looks a bit like a sonar wave or something like that. And this also could be a bit of a nod to Donkey Kong Jungle Beat, where Donkey Kong could clap in that game. Similar, looks kind of similar to that, or like the Hulk's thunder clap it reminds me of. Donkey Kong can climb and scale walls in this game, and he can swim over surfaces of water. In the lagoon level, there was a pool of water that you could swim across, and the Nintendo rep I was talking to mentioned that later in the game you can unlock more abilities as you progress, and he specifically mentioned that you can dive underwater. Now, it's possible they were mistaken. Sometimes this does happen at events, but he seemed quite confident about it. There was this underwater golden banana that had to be reached by raising platforms, and as I raised the platform, the rep mentioned that you could later on dive underwater to get it, but that functionality wasn't present in the demo. He specifically said, there are multiple ways to get that banana, including diving underwater, but it's not possible in the demo. So it was possible they were incorrect. This was just a PR representative, basically. But I asked some follow-up questions about that, and they specifically said that there are multiple ways to approach that, and that is what they said, that I could dive underwater at some point in the game. They seem pretty confident that you could do that, but again, take that with a pinch of salt, I suppose, because I don't have any corroboration on that. That's just what that one rep said to me, but he seemed quite confident, so that's something. Another thing DK can do is whistle by holding down the L button, which is used to open some doors and entrances to secret stages, and he can beat his chest if you hold L and R simultaneously. And again, these feel like potential nods to stuff like Jungle Beats with how they're being used. There are some definite callbacks to some of the musical influence in Donkey Kong's repertoire. In the environment I played it in, I will admit I found the amount of options you have a little bit overwhelming initially, because nobody told me that there were 3 different buttons for punching. And there wasn't really a tutorial, you're just thrown into it, but I'm hoping that in the full game, that's probably not going to be an issue. I think it probably will not be. It's just in a demo environment like this, you're expected to get on with it and just try playing, and you don't have time to waste, so. Something I learned when I was playing this that I hadn't seen mentioned online was that the game actually features optional Wii-style motion controls. I was playing with the split Joy-Con, and the Nintendo rep told me that I could punch by waggling the Joy-Con in my left and right hands. I could also make Donkey Kong beat his chest using motion as well. I thought it was interesting that these controller options weren't mentioned anywhere in the game or on the controller diagram in front of me, and I wasn't exactly sure how they worked. I think you have to hold the Joy-Con upright and then move them backwards and forwards to do the chest beating, and maybe you have to have the Joy-Con horizontal for when you swing to do punches. The Nintendo staff that I was talking to wasn't sure how to differentiate between the two moves. We weren't really sure what the gestures were supposed to be, but it's cool that they tried. It's cool that they put this in as an option, but I'll be honest, it didn't work very well, at least in that environment. It's possible that interference was playing a role in that, but I will say this, even if it does work, you are constantly punching things in this game, especially when you're tunneling through rock. So I just don't see many people using this a lot. I think it would get pretty tiresome playing this with just motion controls, and they were not as responsive as I would have liked. It's possible, again, they were experiencing some kind of interference in that environment, but it just wasn't very reliable. Maybe that's why Nintendo is not advertising this as a big feature. It's just something that the developers wanted to do, and it's in there. I like that they tried, though. I like that that's in there as an option for those who want it. One more thing I'll point out is that in the very opening of the demo, where you see that sequence from the trailer where Donkey Kong smashes through a wall and emerges from the dust, you are actually in control of Donkey Kong doing that. You have to hit the punch button repeatedly, and you feel the rumble in the controller as he punches through the wall, which I thought was nice. You know, this very simple, clever little way that immediately teaches the player how to punch, which is almost certainly the button you're going to be pressing the most in this game. On the subject of DK's moves, here's a question about that I was asked from TJ Gav, who said, how does Donkey Kong's rolling feel in DK Bonanza? Are there momentum physics involved in the way there was with Mario's roll in Mario Odyssey? Can you roll indefinitely? Well, the rolling felt good. It felt satisfying bashing into an enemy with that. There was a nice tactile feel to it, a nice bit of rumble feedback as I collided into an enemy, if I remember correctly. There does appear to be momentum physics for the surfing. I cannot recall if that's the same for the roll, but I would assume that's the case if you're going downhill. It doesn't seem like you can roll indefinitely. From what I can remember, I don't think you can. You can roll into enemies, you can roll into rock a bit, but it stopped after a little while, and Donkey Kong exited the roll, at which point it would be quicker to go into another attack, like a punch, to keep your momentum going. It did feel like the game was trying to discourage you from just doing the same move over and over again. Maybe that's why you have so many different things you can do. And that's understandable because that would become very repetitive. It felt like it was trying to discourage me from doing that and to try different attacks. And I think if you had one move that was particularly advantageous over all the others, one that helped you smash through the terrain much more efficiently than all the others, then players would just end up spamming that and it wouldn't be very fun. I like the combat from what I experienced in this game so far. Donkey Kong's punch feels powerful. Repelling enemies with it feels satisfying. Smashing off their shells, their armor, and seeing their skeletons underneath, that feels good. Smashing the golden bananas with it feels great. There are these challenge areas that you can enter that see you complete a platforming section, or you have to kill a bunch of enemies within a set time. Think of the Muspelheim areas in Bayonetta. That's what they reminded me of. And you were teleported into this other world separate from the main stage, made up of a bunch of floating blocks. A bit like the bonus areas in Donkey Kong Country. The appearance of them reminded me of the campaign levels in Splatoon a little bit, or maybe even the floating block levels in Mario Sunshine. And I like these. They give you a little break from what you're doing. They're pretty fun, nice little challenges, very doable but fun. So I like the combat. However, tunneling through rock and interacting with some of the environments that were heavily destructible felt a bit one note to me, a bit monotonous, especially in that first area. I felt like the level design in the mine area wasn't doing much to communicate what was actually worth smashing through. There is a lot to punch through, and sometimes I felt like it was not intuitive what I should be smashing through and what would be worthwhile versus an area where there's hardly anything to be mined from, apart from a common collectible like gold. The hand slap mechanic does go some way to helping you find collectibles, but it only goes so far. There's a lot to punch through, and they need to communicate, I think, a bit more what is actually worth going through. For me, for the environmental destruction to justify itself as the central mechanic in this game, I think the levels have really got to be more intuitive in how they communicate what is worth smashing through versus what isn't. I could see the novelty of punching through the same materials over and over again quickly wearing out if it's not more interesting. I found the lagoon area to be a bit more interesting because there were numerous ways I could access these hidden areas that I noticed. There was a hidden area inside a hill that I could open by either blowing up the side of it with a bomb or by climbing it, scaling it, and tunneling downwards through the top of it. So that was nice. That was fun. Nice bit of player expression there. I like that. So overall, I enjoyed playing Bonanza, but I was left with some concerns about the longevity of the environmental destruction mechanics. I'm not yet sold on that being the standout feature of this game yet. I like how many familiar Donkey Kong elements and callbacks to past games there seem to be in here. You've got appearances from characters like Cranky Kong, but also in DK's moveset, there's a lot of what feel like little nods to past games like Jungle Beat and Donkey Kong Country. I am quite excited how many collectibles there seem to be in this game. It seems as though there are hundreds of them from what I could see, quite a lot. One of the collectibles you get in the game are fossils that you can mine as you're tunneling through different materials. And if I remember correctly, the game specified that you could exchange these fossils at a shop in the game for new costumes. So it appears you can unlock new costumes for Donkey Kong in the same way you could for Mario in Mario Odyssey. So that sounds excellent, you know. Let me get some cool Funky Kong shades in there. Let me get a weird retro Donkey Kong skin. Let me play as DK64 Donkey Kong like I did in the Mario 64 skin in Odyssey. Go wild with it. I'd love that. You can also collect vinyl discs during the levels that let you play the songs in the game afterwards. I'm assuming that they're in some kind of sound test menu, but I didn't see that. So I'm trying to be optimistic about this game, but I wasn't sold on the environmental destruction part of it quite yet. And I hope that the performance in the final game is better, but it is out in 3 months. It might be mostly finished or maybe even finished by now. I cannot remember if we have any information on that. But maybe there's a patch coming. Maybe this is from a build that isn't from the final game. I don't know. I'm trying to be optimistic, but there were some qualms, some concerns there from me, although I had fun. And I think I'm going to enjoy playing a new 3D Collectathon from Nintendo either way. One of the last games I want to talk about today is the Nintendo Switch 2 Welcome Tour game. This game has been pretty controversial. It is a launch title only on the Switch 2's eShop, as I understand it, a digital-only title, as of recording at least. And it contains a myriad of small mini-games meant to demonstrate the features of the Switch 2. And there's been a lot of criticism directed at this game for not being free. A lot of people think it should be included with the system since it acts almost like a tutorial for it, and it walks you through some of its different unique features, you know, the different functionalities in the Joy-Con and the system itself. Here's my take on that, having played it. The demo I played contained 3 different mini games, all using the mouse controls. The first one, I had to move a cursor out of the path of a bunch of bombs. I'm playing as a little UFO. Bombs are raining down on the screen and you have to survive for as long as possible. If you get hit, the game ends. In another minigame, I had to guess the frame rate being displayed in 2 different windows. And this was illustrated by an object like a ball bouncing across the screen. Had to guess the frame rate at which that happened. And yeah, that's basically that. In the last minigame, I had to move the right Joy-Con in mouse mode and basically feel where on the mouse mat that the HD rumble in the Joy-Con was going to rumble at the most intense point. So I had to move it around left and right and feel the HD rumble and essentially find the point at which it was rumbling the most intensely. That's basically that. I had to move it around until I felt it was the most intense and then click in my guess, enter it. And yeah, pretty easy. I played the welcome tour for about 10-15 minutes overall, and I was able to get the top medal in all three of the games within that time. There appears to be a lot more mini games in it beyond those three, and I will say all three of them were novel and fun, but they had very little staying power. I've said this before, they kind of remind me of the toys from WarioWare that you open once and just play around with a bit, and that's about it. You know, there's some novelty, but that's about all. The UFO mouse mini game was maybe the one that had the most longevity because it was quite addictive. Restarting it is very quick, so it's quite tempting to jump into a game and keep trying over and over again. Beyond that, these games were not the least bit complex or felt like they would be worth paying money for. They are tech demos. And I think in a previous Nintendo generation, they would have absolutely offered this as part of the system. So, at the very least, it should be a free game on the Nintendo Switch Online service if you're a subscriber. I could see that maybe being a bit more reasonable. I think something like that might have went down a bit better, but even then, I do think they should have just given this away for free based upon what I've played so far. Charging for this after the initial price tag of the system, which is pretty steep, it feels like a misstep. The Welcome Tour feels like it contains what could be some really nice educational tools and resources for teaching people about what the system can do. You know, the mouse controls, the haptics, just some basics of video games like frame rates, right? And I think teaching that to kids and to casual audiences has some value, but if it's not included, they're not going to buy it. And I think if this was included, yeah, it would have earned them a lot of goodwill, but not doing that, it's a bad luck for them. They've shot themselves in the foot here. And it's a shame because, in all honesty, all of the games I tried are fun. The game is charming. You know, you can talk to some of the NPCs in it, and there's some funny dialogue there. It's got some of that Nintendo charm. But this game is an elaborate tutorial, and they're charging money for it. But yeah, a bit disappointing. They're usually quite good at offering free software with a new device. You know, I think back to the 3DS with the AR games and Face Raiders and Wii Sports and all that. And I think a free game at launch, at least, you know, to get people to grips with the system, with the Switch 2, would have been just what the doctor ordered. But yeah, it's literally called Nintendo Switch 2 Welcome Tour. I see no argument for this being paid software. I get why Nintendo is doing it. They value their software very highly. But at the end of the day, I disagree with charging money for this, even if it's not going to be very expensive. I mean, it's literally called Nintendo Switch 2 Welcome Tour. So it feels like it should just be there on your system when you open it for the first time. It's maybe the first thing you go into, you know, and you can skip it if you just want to jump into another game. But that's what it feels like to me, is it feels like something that should have just been on everyone's system in the same way that Face Raiders or whatever was. In conclusion, I had fun with it. It seemed like there was more to it than I expected. It seems like there's quite a few different mini games and things you can do in it. And I like that there are medals that you can gain in each different minigame. But beyond this, it's so hard to get behind this when they're charging money for it. So I find it hard to recommend. It's fun, but that's really all I can say for it. I largely agree with a lot of the criticism. And yeah, the fact that they're not even including this in the Nintendo Switch Online subscription or the expansion pack is crazy to me. The last question I'll answer for now comes from Daryl Baxter, friend of mine, who asked this: what surprised you the most? And I think my honest answer to this is just seeing how well some of the games ran and how quickly they loaded on the new hardware. That impressed me, especially some of the upgraded older games like Zelda. I played Tears of the Kingdom in both handheld modes and on the TV, and from what I could tell, that was a locked 60 frames. I mean, it's conceivable that someone could do something to make it drop, you know, if they spawn a bunch of vehicles or whatever, or build a mech and destroy a bunch of the environment, maybe you can make it drop. But from what I played, you know, with the little amount of time I had, I did try to stress the game out as much as I can to see if I could get it to do that, and I couldn't. I went to the depths. I tried using some Sheikah vehicles. I flew through the depths in one of those and just no drops whatsoever. It was smooth as butter. And something else I did is I tried fast traveling into the Skylands and I nosedived down to Kakariko Village. And I mean, first of all, fast traveling in that game, it's so quick now. It's like 2 seconds to go anywhere. And I didn't notice the frame stutter one bit as I dived down like as quickly as I could. And the draw distance was noticeably better as well. So seeing that at what looks like a very steady 60 frames with improved textures, higher resolution, I mean, it really has to be seen in person to get the full effect. The footage Nintendo's shown of it so far, at least in that direct I watched, it didn't really do it justice. Seeing it in person as someone who put maybe 180 hours in that game, something like that, it wowed me. And, you know, I knew they were working on this for quite a long time, and I purposely left some things to do in that game for when this version would come out, and I'm glad I did because this is very impressive. And on the handheld, by the way, it looked excellent. The colors really popped. It must be running at 1080p now because it looked noticeably better in handheld mode than on Switch 1. And obviously the frame rate is much higher too. So again, it's conceivable someone can make that frame rate drop. I'm sure there's probably a way of doing it by spawning in a bunch of contraptions or whatever. But just talking about my limited experience with that impressed me. And seeing some of the third-party games as well. Yakuza ran really well. Hades 2 ran really well. That was the consistent thing, was other than Donkey Kong, everything was running really quickly in terms of loading times. And the frame rate looked good, the image quality, things that I don't really expect having played a bunch of the Switch over the past 8 years or whatever. I don't expect it to look this good and to run this well. So that surprised me, honestly, is just the consistency in general with how well these games ran and looked. So I think when you see that in person, you get the full effect, the higher resolution and the steadier frame rates. I think if you're interested in that type of thing, this might impress you. That's all I'm going to talk about today. Maybe on a future podcast or something, I am going to talk a bit more about Kirby, the GameCube games that I tried. But yeah, that's about all I'm going to talk about today. If you have any more questions, leave them in the comments. And if I have time, I might do a follow-up video and answer some more, talk about some other things that I got to try. But I really just want to focus on some of the big first-party stuff today. And I've gone on very, very long. So thank you for listening to this. I hope you enjoyed it. I probably said a bunch of wrong stuff, but you know, a little bit of this is going from memory. I did make notes as I was playing this stuff, but you know, I wanted to have fun and enjoy my time there. Thank you to Nintendo for inviting me. Those are some very honest thoughts, and again, if you have any questions, leave them there. I do podcasts on my Patreon where I answer questions like this all the time, and yeah, I do a bunch of podcasts on there, exclusive videos. I've recently done an exclusive 90-minute video on Patreon, which you can check out. But until next time, thank you for listening. Thank you for watching. Subscribe if you like this. Give me a like on YouTube, and I'll see you later. Goodbye.